She was 7 years old, sitting alone on a moss-covered log in the Tennessee wilderness, her pink Disney backpack torn and muddy. Emma Rose Patterson's desperate sobs echoed through the empty forest as darkness crept between the towering oaks. But her cries suddenly stopped when the massive shadow emerged from the brush just 20 feet away. The 400-pound black bear should have sent her screaming. Instead, it did something that defied every survival instinct known to man. It sat down beside her. The forest held its breath. Not a single bird chirped. Even the wind seemed to pause as the enormous creature settled its bulk against the fallen log, close enough that Emma could see her own reflection in its dark, intelligent eyes. "Don't hurt me, please," she whispered, her small voice breaking. "I'm already broken." The bear's massive head tilted slightly, and something impossible flickered across its expression. Recognition, perhaps even compassion. What had driven a wild predator to protect a helpless child? And why did Emma Patterson need protecting at all? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. The Great Smoky Mountains had always been a place where broken souls came to heal, but Emma Rose Patterson wasn't here by choice. 3 days earlier, she'd been living in a cramped trailer outside Gatlinburg with her stepfather Bobby, counting the hours until he came home smelling like whiskey and regret. Now she was alone in 800,000 acres of wilderness, abandoned like yesterday's newspaper. Bobby Patterson wasn't a bad man, not really. At 45, the former Army sergeant carried invisible wounds from 2 tours in Afghanistan, scars that no amount of bourbon could numb. When he'd married Emma's mother, Grace, 18 months ago, he'd promised to love them both. But Grace was gone now. 8 months in the ground after what the police called a car accident, and Bobby was drowning in debts that had nothing to do with gambling and everything to do with the wrong kind of people asking the right kind of questions. Emma didn't understand the phone calls that came at midnight, or why Bobby would disappear for days at a time, returning with bruised knuckles and empty eyes. She only knew that yesterday morning he'd received another call, and this time when he hung up, he was crying. "Pack your backpack, sweetheart," he'd whispered, his voice breaking. "We're going on an adventure." But adventures weren't supposed to end with your daddy driving away while you picked wildflowers, leaving you alone with nothing but a pink Disney backpack and the echo of his truck engine fading into silence. 2 miles away, Dr. Samuel Brooks was measuring coffee grounds with the precision of a man who had nothing but time. At 68, the retired veterinarian lived alone in a cabin that smelled like pine sap and loneliness, surrounded by photos of a life that felt like someone else's memory. His wife Helen had been gone 2 years now, claimed by cancer, despite everything modern medicine could throw at it. Their adult children lived in California, too busy with their own lives to call more than twice a month. Sam's hands shook slightly as he poured the hot water, not from age, but from the weight of a decision he'd been contemplating for weeks. The bottle of Helen's leftover morphine sat in the medicine cabinet like a loaded gun, promising an end to the crushing emptiness that had become his constant companion. He'd lost his veterinary license after a malpractice lawsuit that had more to do with whistleblowing than negligence, and now he survived on Social Security checks that barely covered the mortgage on memories. But today would be different, though Sam didn't know it yet. Today, the sound of a child's desperate crying would carry across the mountain air, reaching his cabin just as he was reaching for Helen's photo on the mantelpiece. Today, a little girl's terror would give an old man a reason to live, and a broken bear would remind them both that sometimes the most unlikely families are forged in the crucible of shared pain. The phone call came at 2:30 p.m. on a Tuesday that would change everything. Bobby Patterson sat in his rusted Ford pickup on Forest Service Road 447, engine idling, while Emma hummed Spanish lullabies in the passenger seat, the same songs her mother Grace used to sing when nightmares kept her awake. "You got 24 hours, Patterson," the voice crackled through his burner phone, cold as January wind. "Deliver the package or your gambling debts transfer to the kid." Emma looked up from her coloring book, green eyes wide with innocent curiosity. "Who's on the phone, Daddy Bobby?" Bobby's hand trembled as he gripped the steering wheel. Package. They were calling her a package now, like she was cargo instead of the bright-eyed little girl who still left him crayon drawings on the kitchen table. "Nobody important, sweetheart. Just work stuff." But Emma had heard enough midnight conversations to recognize the tone. She'd learned to read fear in the set of Bobby's shoulders, in the way his jaw clenched when certain numbers appeared on his phone. Her mother had taught her that adults weren't always truthful when they were scared, and Bobby was terrified. "Listen to me, Patterson," the voice continued. "We know what happened to your wife. We know she was asking too many questions. Wouldn't want little Emma to have an accident too, would we?" The threat hit Bobby like a physical blow. Grace hadn't died in a car accident. She'd been murdered for getting too close to a human trafficking ring that operated through the foster care system. As a social worker, she'd started noticing patterns. Children disappearing from temporary placements, families with perfect paperwork but no history, case files that vanished overnight. When she'd shared her suspicions with Bobby, he'd begged her to be careful. When she'd died 3 days later, he'd known careful wasn't enough. "I can't do this," Bobby whispered into the phone, glancing at Emma's trusting face. "She's just a baby. Grace would never forgive me." "Grace is past caring about forgiveness," the voice laughed. "You got 2 choices, soldier boy. Hand over the girl or we take her anyway and you join your wife 6 feet under. Your gambling debts say you owe us 50 grand. The kid's worth twice that to the right buyer." There were no gambling debts. Bobby had never set foot in a casino in his life. But the story gave him cover for the real reason men in expensive suits kept showing up at their trailer. Emma was a witness. She'd been in the house the night her mother died, hidden in the bedroom closet while Grace fought for her life. She'd seen faces, heard names, watched her mother scream for help that never came. Emma started to hum again, and Bobby's heart shattered into pieces smaller than her crayon shavings. The song was Las Mañanitas, the Mexican birthday song Grace had taught her. Emma didn't even know her real birthday. Grace had been undocumented when Emma was born, and the paperwork was a patchwork of lies and hope. But every month, Emma would pick a random day and declare it her birthday, just so she could sing the song that connected her to the mother she'd never really known. "Daddy Bobby, are we almost there?" Emma asked, pointing at a wooden sign that read Cataract Falls Trail, 3 miles. "Almost, Princess," Bobby managed, his voice thick with unshed tears. He pulled over at a scenic overlook, the kind of place families stop to take photos and make memories. Through the windshield, the Smoky Mountains stretched endlessly, layer upon layer of blue-green ridges disappearing into afternoon haze. "I need to check the engine real quick," he lied, climbing out of the truck. "Why don't you pick some flowers for Mama's grave? She always loved wild flowers." Emma's face lit up with the pure joy only children possess. She scrambled out of the passenger seat, her pink backpack bouncing as she ran toward a patch of purple wildflowers growing beside the road. Bobby watched her go, memorizing the way her auburn hair caught the sunlight, the careful way she knelt to examine each bloom before picking it. In her backpack, hidden in a secret compartment Emma didn't know existed, was $10,000 in cash, money Grace had saved to disappear with Emma if things went bad. There was also a USB drive containing recordings Grace had made of phone conversations, license plate numbers, and photographs that could bring down an entire network of predators. Emma was carrying enough evidence to save dozens of children. but she was just 7 years old and didn't understand that her mother had made her a walking target. Bobby climbed back into the truck, tears streaming down his face as he put it in drive. In his rearview mirror, he could see Emma running after him, her small voice calling, "Daddy Bobby, come back, I'm not done picking flowers." But he couldn't stop. If he looked back one more time, he'd never find the strength to leave her, and then they'd both end up dead. The temperature dropped 15 degrees when the sun disappeared behind the ridge, and Emma Rose Patterson had never been so cold in her 7 years of life. She'd stopped running after Bobby's truck hours ago, when her small legs gave out and the reality settled in like November frost. He wasn't coming back. Now she sat on the moss-covered log, clutching her pink backpack and trying to remember everything her mother had taught her about being brave. "Mija," Grace used to whisper during thunderstorms, "fear is just love with nowhere to go. When you're scared, find something to love instead." But there was nothing to love in this wilderness except the memory of her mother's voice, and even that was fading like the last light filtering through the pine boughs above. Emma's stomach cramped with hunger, and her lips were cracked from dehydration. She'd found a small stream earlier and drunk from it the way she'd seen in movies, cupping her hands and hoping the water wouldn't make her sick. That's when she heard the footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, moving through the underbrush with the confidence of something that belonged here, something that knew these woods better than any lost little girl ever could. Emma's breath caught in her throat as she pressed herself against the log, making herself as small as possible while her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. The black bear emerged from the tree line like a shadow-given substance. 400 pounds of muscle and fur, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to look right through her. Emma had seen bears at the zoo with her mother, safely contained behind glass and concrete, but this was different. This was raw nature in its purest form, a predator that could kill her with a single swipe of its massive paws. But Bruno, though Emma didn't know his name yet, wasn't looking at her like prey. He was looking at her like a puzzle he was trying to solve. His great head tilted slightly as he processed the sound of her quiet sobbing. Something about her reminded him of another little girl, another lifetime, when he'd lived in a cabin with an elderly couple who'd treated him like family instead of a wild animal. Harold and Ruth Jenkins had found Bruno as a cub, orphaned when poachers killed his mother for her gallbladder. They'd raised him with patience and love, teaching him to open doors and respond to commands, to be gentle with their visiting grandchildren and protective of their property. For 5 years, Bruno had been more pet than predator, more family member than beast. Then came the fire. Bruno's scarred left shoulder ached as he remembered that terrible night 3 years ago. The propane leak, the spark from Harold's cigarette, the cabin going up like a matchstick house. He'd tried to wake them, scratching at their bedroom door until his claws drew sparks from the metal handle. But the smoke had taken them in their sleep, and by the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing left but ash and the memory of 2 people who'd given a wild animal the closest thing to unconditional love he'd ever known. Now, looking at Emma's tear-streaked face, Bruno felt that same protective instinct stirring in his chest. She was small and helpless and alone, just like he'd been after the fire. The rational part of his bare brain told him to walk away, to leave the human child to her own fate. But the part of him that remembered Ruth reading bedtime stories and Harold teaching him to shake hands wouldn't let him abandon her. Slowly, carefully, Bruno sat down beside the log. Emma's sobbing stopped abruptly, replaced by the kind of breathless terror that comes from finding yourself face to face with your own mortality. But when Bruno made no aggressive moves, when he simply sat there like a furry mountain breathing quietly in the growing darkness, something in Emma's fear began to shift. "Please don't hurt me," she whispered in English, then repeated it in Spanish. Por favor, no me hagas daño. Bruno's ears perked up at the Spanish words. Ruth had been a retired teacher who spoke 3 languages, and she'd often practiced her Spanish with the local immigrant families who brought their children to her for tutoring. Siéntate, Bruno, she'd say. Sit, boy. The command in Spanish triggered a flood of memories, and Bruno found himself responding to Emma's voice the way he'd once responded to Ruth's. When a pack of coyotes began yipping in the distance, signaling the start of their evening hunt, Bruno positioned his massive body between Emma and the sound. He didn't growl or bare his teeth. He simply became a living wall of fur and muscle, letting any potential threats know that this small human was under his protection. Emma watched this incredible display of protectiveness and felt something crack open in her chest. It wasn't fear anymore, or even wonder. It was recognition. This bear, this magnificent creature who could have killed her without breaking stride, was choosing to keep her safe instead. Just like her mother had done, just like Bobby was supposed to do. Are you lonely too? She asked quietly, reaching out with one small hand to touch the coarse fur on Bruno's back. He tensed for a moment, then relaxed, accepting her touch with the same grace he'd once shown Harold's grandchildren. As the first stars appeared overhead, Emma curled up against Bruno's warm flank, using her backpack as a pillow. She was still cold, still hungry, still terrified of what tomorrow might bring. But for the first time since Bobby's truck had disappeared around that bend, she wasn't alone. Neither was Bruno. For the first time since the fire took away the only family he'd ever known, he had someone to protect again. Someone who needed him, not because he was useful or trained or obedient, but simply because he was there when everything else had fallen apart. In the distance, a pair of headlights swept across the mountain road as Dr. Samuel Brooks made his evening drive, following the same route he'd taken every night since Helen died. Tonight, though, something would make him pull over. Tonight, he'd hear the sound of a child singing herself to sleep in Spanish, and an old man's purpose would finally reveal itself. Dr. Samuel Brooks heard the singing first, a child's voice carrying across the mountain air like a prayer wrapped in melody. He'd been driving the same route every evening for 2 years, ever since Helen's funeral, following the winding road that led nowhere in particular but away from the empty cabin that still smelled like her lavender soap. Tonight, something made him pull his old Chevy to the shoulder and roll down the windows. Las mañanitas, te las cantamos aquí, drifted through the pine-scented darkness, so soft he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. But Sam Brooks had spent 40 years as a veterinarian, and his ears were trained to catch the smallest sounds of distress. This wasn't imagination. This was a child, alone in the wilderness, singing herself to sleep. He grabbed his flashlight and emergency medical kit from the truck bed, muscle memory from decades of midnight calls to treat injured animals. The trail down from the road was steep and treacherous in the dark, but Sam navigated it with the sure-footed confidence of a man who'd spent his youth exploring these same mountains. What he found when he reached the clearing made him question his sanity. A little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, was curled against the side of a massive black bear like he was an oversized teddy bear. The bear's dark eyes tracked Sam's movement but showed no aggression, only a watchful protectiveness that seemed almost human in its intensity. The child was asleep, one small hand twisted in the bear's thick fur, her face peaceful despite the circumstances that had clearly brought her here. Sam recognized that bear. Every local did. Bruno had been Harold and Ruth Jenkins's pet for years before the fire took them, and the wildlife officials had decided to let him remain free rather than relocate him. He was harmless, they said, too domesticated to be truly wild, but too wild to be caged. Sam had treated him once for an infected paw back when Harold was still alive and worried about his unusual family member. But what was a bear doing protecting a human child? And where were this little girl's parents? The answer came in fragments over the next hour as Emma stirred awake, her green eyes wide with fear, until she realized Bruno was still there, still safe, still watching over her. Sam approached slowly, hands visible, speaking in the gentle tones he'd once used with frightened animals and their worried owners. "Hello there, sweetheart. I'm Dr. Brooks. I live just up the mountain. Are you hurt?" Emma studied his weathered face, taking in the kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the way Bruno seemed to accept his presence without alarm. "Are you one of the bad men?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, honey. I'm one of the helpers." "Your mama ever tell you about helpers?" Something in Emma's expression shifted, a crack appearing in the wall of terror she'd built around herself. "Mama said helpers come in all shapes and sizes. Some have uniforms, some have stethoscopes, some have—" She looked at Bruno. "Some have fur." That's when Sam noticed the bruises, fading yellow-green marks on Emma's wrists that looked suspiciously like finger impressions. Old injuries, at least a week old, too precise to be accidental. His veterinary training had taught him to recognize signs of abuse in animals, and the pattern was grimly similar in humans. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma Rose Patterson. I'm 7 3/4 years old, and I live at 47 Pine Hollow Lane in Gatlinburg." The recitation came out like a practiced speech, the kind parents teach children in case they get lost. "But I don't think I live there anymore." "Why's that, Emma?" "Because Daddy Bobby left me here. He said I needed to learn a lesson about real loss." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Bruno made a low, rumbling sound deep in his chest. Not a growl, but something almost like a purr, a sound of comfort. Sam's hands clenched into fists. Whoever this Bobby was, he'd abandoned a child in 800,000 acres of wilderness. But the bruises suggested something darker than simple abandonment. This had the hallmarks of something far more sinister. "Emma, do you know why Bobby left you here?" She nodded gravely with the terrible wisdom of a child forced to grow up too fast. "Bad men called him. They wanted me to go with them, but Bobby said no. Then they said if he didn't give me to them, they'd hurt both of us. So he brought me here instead." She paused, processing thoughts too complex for her years. "I think he thought leaving me was the lesser bad thing." The pieces clicked together in Sam's mind with horrible clarity. Human trafficking. It was a problem that had been growing in the rural areas around the Smokies, children disappearing from homes and foster care, never to be seen again. If Bobby Patterson was involved, either as perpetrator or victim, Emma was in more danger than she could possibly understand. "Emma, I need to ask you something important. In your backpack, do you have anything that might be valuable? Papers? Or maybe something your mama gave you?" Emma's hand flew protectively to her pink Disney backpack. "Just my clothes and my pictures of Mama? And some money Bobby put in there, but I'm not supposed to touch it." "How much money, sweetheart?" "I don't know. It's in the secret pocket. Bobby said it was for emergencies." Emma unzipped a hidden compartment Sam hadn't noticed, revealing bundles of cash held together with rubber bands. His estimate put it at close to $10,000, more money than most 7-year-olds would see in a lifetime. But there was something else in the compartment. A small USB drive, the kind used to store computer files. Sam's blood ran cold as he realized what this might mean. Emma wasn't just a victim of circumstance, she was carrying evidence. Someone had prepared her to run, given her everything she'd need to disappear. The question was whether Bobby Patterson was saving her or delivering her. "Emma, I'm going to help you, but I need you to trust me. We need to get you somewhere safe while we figure out what to do next." "What about Bruno?" Emma's arms tightened around the bear's massive neck. "I can't leave him. He saved me from the scary sounds in the dark." Bruno, as if understanding every word, nuzzled Emma's cheek with his enormous head. The gentleness of the gesture was stunning. 400 pounds of predator showing the kind of tenderness usually reserved for family. Sam had seen enough animal behavior to recognize bonding when he saw it, but this was something beyond mere attachment. This was love, pure and simple. "Bruno can come with us," Sam decided, knowing it was probably illegal and definitely crazy. "My cabin's not far. We'll figure out the rest from there." The walk back to Sam's truck was surreal. Emma rode on Bruno's back like he was a furry pony, chattering quietly in Spanish while the bear navigated the rough terrain with careful precision. Sam found himself thinking of Helen, wondering what she'd make of this unlikely procession. She'd always said his retirement would be boring, that he'd find some stray creature to take care of before long. She just probably hadn't imagined it would be a traumatized child and a domesticated bear. At the cabin, Sam's first priority was getting Emma fed and warm. She devoured 2 peanut butter sandwiches and a glass of milk while Bruno settled on the porch, clearly comfortable with human habitation but respectful of boundaries. The bear had been well trained, Sam realized. Someone had loved him enough to teach him manners. "Emma, I need to ask you about your mama. What happened to her?" Emma's face crumpled, and for a moment she looked like the lost little girl she was, instead of the remarkably composed survivor she'd been forced to become. "She died in a car accident. That's what the police said. But—" She hesitated, glancing toward the window where Bruno's silhouette was visible in the porch light. "But what, sweetheart?" "I don't think it was an accident. Mama was scared of something before she died. She kept saying she needed to tell someone about the bad things happening to kids. But every time she tried, something would go wrong. Her computer would break, or her phone would stop working, or people would tell her she was imagining things." Sam felt the pieces of a terrible puzzle clicking into place. Grace Patterson had been investigating something, probably the same trafficking ring that was now pursuing her daughter. Emma was a witness, a loose end that needed to be tied up permanently. "Emma, do you know what your mama was investigating?" "Kids who disappeared, foster kids mostly, but some others too. She had a big map on her bedroom wall with pins in it, showing where kids went missing. She said there was a pattern, but the grown-ups didn't want to see it." Sam pulled out his phone, staring at the screen as he debated his next move. The smart thing would be to call Child Protective Services, let the authorities handle this. But if Emma's mother had been killed for investigating trafficking, and if the network was sophisticated enough to operate through official channels, then the authorities might not be safe either. Instead, he dialed a number he hadn't called in 3 years. Margaret O'Sullivan answered on the second ring, her voice gruff with sleep. "Maggie, it's Sam Brooks. I need your help, and I think you're going to want to hear this." Outside on the porch, Bruno lifted his massive head and sniffed the air. Something was coming. Multiple vehicles, moving slowly up the mountain road with their headlights off. His enhanced hearing picked up the sound of radios crackling, men talking in low voices about search patterns and containment. Bobby Patterson had talked. Whether by choice or by force, he'd revealed Emma's location, and now the bad men were coming to collect what they believed was theirs. Bruno rose to his feet, every muscle in his body tensing for battle. Inside the cabin, Emma was safe and warm and fed for the first time in days. He'd tasted family again, felt the simple joy of being needed and wanted and loved. He wouldn't let them take that away. Not again. The war for Emma Rose Patterson was about to begin, and a heartbroken bear was ready to fight it. Margaret Maggie O'Sullivan arrived at Sam's cabin like a force of nature in a battered Honda Civic. her 72-year-old frame moving with the purposeful efficiency of someone who'd spent 40 years patching up broken bodies and broken souls. She took one look at Emma curled up on the couch, another at Bruno standing guard on the porch, and nodded grimly. "Lord have mercy," she muttered, setting down a medical bag that had seen more action than most field hospitals. "Sam Brooks, what have you gotten yourself into?" But her eyes were soft as she knelt beside Emma, hands gentle as she checked the child's temperature and pulse. Maggie had never had children of her own, a cruel twist of biology that had denied her the one thing she'd wanted most. Instead, she'd spent 4 decades mothering other people's babies in the ICU, becoming the kind of nurse who remembered birthdays and kept pictures in her locker and cried quietly in supply closets when the little ones didn't make it. "This is Maggie," Sam told Emma, who was watching the older woman with wary green eyes. "She's a nurse, one of the best I've ever known." "I'm retired," Maggie corrected, but her hands were already moving with practiced competence, checking Emma's pupils, examining the fading bruises on her wrists. "These restraint marks are at least a week old, and this child is dehydrated and malnourished." "Sam, where did you find her?" Emma answered before Sam could speak. "Bruno found me. I was lost and scared and crying, and he came out of the woods and sat with me. He's my guardian angel bear." Maggie followed Emma's gaze to the porch, where Bruno's massive silhouette was backlit by the moon. In 40 years of nursing, she'd seen plenty of therapy animals, but never anything like this. The bear's posture radiated protective alertness, like a soldier standing watch over precious cargo. "Guardian angel bear?" Maggie repeated softly. "Well, I've seen stranger things." "Not many, but some." She turned back to Emma, her voice taking on the gentle tone she'd once used with frightened children in the hospital. "Honey, Dr. Brooks told me a little about your situation. You've been through something terrible, haven't you?" Emma nodded, her small fingers twisted in the hem of her dirty shirt. "Bad men wanted to take me away from Daddy Bobby. He didn't want to give me to them, but they said they'd hurt us both if he didn't. So he left me in the woods instead. I think he thought it was safer." "Safer for who?" Maggie's voice carried an edge of steel that Sam recognized from their brief encounters during Helen's hospital stays. Maggie O'Sullivan had never suffered fools gladly, and she had particularly strong opinions about adults who failed to protect children. "For me," Emma said simply, "the bad men don't know where I am now. Bobby said sometimes the only way to win is not to play the game." Sam pulled Maggie aside while Emma dozed fitfully on the couch, Bruno's steady breathing visible through the window like a natural sedative. "Maggie, there's more. She's carrying evidence, money, a USB drive. I think her mother was investigating human trafficking before she died. Emma says it wasn't really a car accident." Maggie's face hardened. She'd seen enough domestic violence cases to recognize the patterns, the way predators operated, the systems that failed the most vulnerable. "That child is a walking target, Sam. If what you're saying is true, they won't stop until they get her back." "I know. That's why I called you. You've got connections in the underground networks, people who help families disappear when the official channels fail them." It was true. In her retirement, Maggie had become involved with a loose network of social workers, nurses, teachers, and retired law enforcement officers who operated outside official channels to help domestic violence victims and their children escape dangerous situations. It wasn't entirely legal, but it was effective, and Maggie's nursing background made her invaluable when medical care was needed off the books. "Sam, we can't handle this alone. This isn't a woman running from an abusive husband. This is organized crime. These people kill witnesses." As if summoned by her words, Bruno's low growl rumbled through the cabin walls. Both adults froze, listening to the sound that had woken Emma from her uneasy sleep. Car engines, multiple vehicles moving slowly up the mountain road with their headlights dark. "They found us," Emma whispered, her face pale with terror. "The bad men found us." Sam's mind raced through their options. The cabin was isolated, which had been an advantage for privacy but was now a trap. One road in, one road out, and no way to escape without being seen. His old hunting rifle was in the bedroom closet, but what good was one gun against multiple attackers? "The root cellar," Maggie said suddenly. "Sam, you still have that old root cellar behind the cabin? The one your grandfather built during the Depression?" "It connects to the old mine shaft system." Sam nodded, understanding immediately. "Emma, we need to move. Now!" But Emma was looking at Bruno, who had risen to his full height on the porch, every muscle tensed for confrontation. "I can't leave him. They'll hurt him." "Honey, Bruno is a wild animal. He can take care of himself better than we can take care of him." "No!" Emma's voice cracked with desperation. "He's not just a wild animal. He's family. Harold and Ruth Jenkins raised him from a baby bear. He lived with them for 5 years before they died in a fire. He knows how to open doors and follow commands and be gentle with little kids because they taught him. He's not really wild anymore. He's just lonely." Sam stared at Emma in amazement. "How do you know all that?" "He told me, not with words, but he showed me. When I was crying the first night, he made the same sounds Ruth used to make when she comforted him. And when I said, 'Siéntate,' in Spanish, he sat down immediately because that's what Ruth taught him. He remembers being loved, Dr. Brooks. He remembers being part of a family." The sound of car doors slamming cut through the night air. Male voices, low and urgent, discussing search patterns and perimeter control. Professional voices, the kind that belonged to people who'd done this before. 3 minutes, Maggie estimated grimly. "That's how long we have before they breach this cabin." Bruno's form disappeared from the porch, and Sam felt his heart sink. The bear was abandoning them, returning to the wild where he belonged, leaving them to face whatever was coming alone. But Emma smiled through her tears. "He's not running away," she said with absolute certainty. "He's getting into position. Bruno's really smart, Dr. Brooks. Smarter than most people think bears can be. Harold used to say he was like having a big furry son who could think for himself." The first flashlight beam swept across the cabin's front windows, then another and another, until the entire structure was illuminated like a stage set. Sam grabbed the emergency bag he'd packed years ago when Helen's cancer made every day uncertain. First aid supplies, cash, important documents, enough provisions for 3 days. "Margaret O'Sullivan, this is the last time I follow one of your crazy plans," he muttered as he lifted the root cellar's heavy wooden door. "Sam Brooks, if we survive this, I'll make you the best apple pie you've ever tasted," Maggie shot back, helping Emma down the wooden ladder into the musty darkness below. Above them, the sound of splintering wood announced that their visitors had tired of knocking. Boots on hardwood floors, furniture being overturned, the efficient destruction of a thorough search. Emma pressed her face against Sam's shoulder, trying to muffle her frightened breathing. "Where is she?" a voice demanded, carrying clearly through the cabin floor above their heads. "Brooks, we know you have the girl. Make this easy on yourself." Sam recognized the voice from news reports he'd seen over the years. Detective Morris Crane, a dirty cop who'd been suspected of involvement in several missing persons cases but never formally charged. If Crane was here, it meant the corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. A roar split the night air, 400 pounds of fury and protective instinct unleashed. Bruno had kept his promise to Emma, positioning himself between the cabin and the road, cutting off the intruder's escape route. The sound of men shouting, guns being drawn, car alarms triggered by massive claws raking across metal and glass. "Move!" Maggie whispered urgently, pushing them toward the tunnel that connected to the old mine shaft system. "Bruno's buying us time, but not much." As they crawled through the narrow passage that Sam's grandfather had carved nearly a century ago, Emma whispered a prayer in Spanish, her small voice echoing off the stone walls. Behind them, the battle for their lives was just beginning, and their fate rested in the massive paws of a bear who'd learned that sometimes family was worth dying for. The mine shaft tunnel stretched into darkness like the throat of some ancient beast, and Emma Rose Patterson had never been so terrified in her 7 years of life. The musty air pressed against her lungs as she crawled behind Dr. Brooks, her pink backpack scraping against the rough stone walls with every movement. Behind them, the sounds of chaos grew fainter but no less terrifying, men shouting, car doors slamming, and somewhere in the distance, Bruno's defiant roars echoing through the mountain night. "Keep moving, sweetheart," Maggie whispered from behind, her arthritic hands struggling with the tight confines of the passage. "Just a little further." But Emma's chest was tightening with each breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. The walls seemed to be closing in, reminding her of another dark space, another time when she'd hidden while bad things happened to people she loved. The night her mother died, she'd crouched in the bedroom closet for 3 hours, listening to terrible sounds from the living room, too terrified to move until the silence became worse than the noise. "I can't," she gasped, stopping so suddenly that Sam nearly collided with her. "I can't breathe. It's too small. It's too dark." Sam's weathered hand found her shoulder in the blackness. "Emma, look at me. Can you see my eyes?" She could, barely. The faint reflection of light from somewhere ahead caught in his wire-rimmed glasses. "A little." "Good. Now listen to my voice. You know what I used to tell scared animals when I was a veterinarian? I told them that being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you keep going even when you are afraid. And right now, Bruno is being brave for us. Can you be brave for him?" Above their heads, something heavy hit the cabin floor with a crash that sent dust raining down through the wooden planks. Emma thought of Bruno facing down men with guns, choosing to fight instead of run, and found a reserve of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Okay," she whispered. "But can we talk while we crawl? So it doesn't feel so quiet?" "Of course, honey." Maggie's voice came from behind, warm and steady despite the circumstances. "Tell me about your mama. What was she like?" As they continued through the tunnel, Emma's voice became their lifeline, her memories of Grace Patterson filling the darkness with something brighter than fear. She talked about how her mother sang while cooking, always in Spanish, teaching Emma the words to songs about hummingbirds and morning glory. She described Grace's work as a social worker, how she'd come home with stories about children who needed help, her face sad but determined. "Mama said her job was to be a voice for kids who couldn't speak for themselves," Emma said, her words echoing off the stone walls. She had pictures on her bedroom wall of all the children she'd helped. Some were adopted into good families, some went to live with relatives, some aged out of the system but stayed in touch. She was proud of every single one. Sam felt something twist in his chest. Grief for a woman he'd never met. Admiration for someone who'd died trying to protect the most vulnerable. Helen would have liked Grace Patterson, he thought. They both had that same fierce compassion, that refusal to look away when others suffered. "What about the map with the pins?" Maggie asked gently. "The one you mentioned earlier?" Emma's voice grew smaller. "That started about 6 months before Mama died." She began noticing patterns in cases that got transferred to other workers or closed without explanation. Kids would disappear from foster homes, and when she'd ask about them, she'd be told they'd been moved to out-of-state placements or had run away. But the paperwork never seemed right. The tunnel began to slope upward, and Sam could smell fresher air ahead. The mine shaft's main entrance, hopefully far enough from the cabin to provide safe passage to the surface. But Emma's story was painting a picture that made his blood run cold. Mama started keeping her own records, Emma continued. Pictures, addresses, case numbers. She had a secret file hidden in her bedroom that she thought I didn't know about, but I saw her looking at it sometimes, crying. She'd marked locations on a map where kids had gone missing, and when you connected the dots, they made a pattern, like a route. A trafficking route, Maggie said grimly. Your mother discovered something big, Emma, something worth killing for. They reached a wider chamber where the tunnel intersected with the main mine shaft, and Sam risked turning on his small flashlight. The beam revealed rough-hewn walls supported by rotting timber, evidence of the mountain's mining past when men had burrowed into its heart seeking coal and copper. More importantly, it revealed a ladder leading upward to a concealed exit 50 yards from his cabin. Emma, Sam said carefully, do you still have that USB drive, the one in your backpack? She nodded, patting the secret compartment. Mama gave it to me the night before she died. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should give it to someone I trusted completely, someone who would know what to do with it. Did she say what was on it? Pictures, recordings, proof that important people were helping bad people hurt children. She said it was enough to shut down the whole operation, but only if it got to the right person. Maggie and Sam exchanged glances in the flashlight's glow. They were holding evidence that could expose a trafficking network, but they were also holding a death sentence. No wonder Emma had been marked for elimination. No wonder Bobby Patterson had been forced to choose between his stepdaughter's life and his own. Above them, the sounds of pursuit had grown closer. Flashlight beams swept across the mine entrance, and voices called out search patterns. Bruno's roars had stopped, and Emma's face crumpled with grief. They hurt him, she whispered. They hurt Bruno because he was protecting me. We don't know that, Sam said firmly, though his own heart was heavy with the same fear. Bears are tougher than people think, and Bruno's smart. He knows these mountains better than those men ever will. But even as he spoke the words, Sam wondered if they were true. How long could one bear, even a large and intelligent one, hold off multiple armed men? And what would they do to Bruno when they realized he was just an animal, not the dangerous predator they'd been led to expect? They climbed the ladder in silence, each rung bringing them closer to the surface and whatever waited above. The mine's exit was concealed by decades of overgrowth, brambles and wild honeysuckle, creating a natural camouflage that had hidden the entrance from casual observation. Sam pushed aside the vegetation and peered out into the night. The cabin was half a mile away, clearly visible through the trees, surrounded by vehicles with flashing red and blue lights. But these weren't the black SUVs of the trafficking network. These were official police cars, ambulances, even what looked like a fire truck. Help had arrived, but whether it was the right kind of help remained to be seen. Dr. Brooks, Emma tugged on his sleeve, pointing toward a section of forest between their position and the cabin. Look. A large, dark shape was moving through the trees, limping but mobile, heading away from the chaos surrounding the cabin. Bruno had escaped, wounded but alive, and he was following their scent trail toward the mine entrance. Emma's face lit up with joy so pure it took Sam's breath away. In the middle of the worst night of her young life, surrounded by danger and uncertainty, she'd found room for happiness because her friend was safe. He's coming to find us, she said with absolute certainty. Bruno always keeps his promises. As if summoned by her words, the massive bear emerged from the underbrush 20 yards away. His left shoulder was dark with blood, and he favored his right front paw, but his eyes were alert and focused on Emma with laser intensity. When he saw her safe and unharmed, he made a sound Sam had never heard from a wild animal, a rumble of pure relief and joy. Emma ran to him without hesitation, wrapping her small arms around his massive neck while he nuzzled her cheek with infinite gentleness. Watching them together, Sam finally understood what Helen had been trying to tell him during those long hospital nights when she'd talked about the different forms love could take. Family wasn't always blood. Sometimes it was choice. Sometimes it was sacrifice. And sometimes it was a heartbroken bear and a frightened little girl finding exactly what they needed in each other. The betrayal came from the one person Emma Rose Patterson had learned to trust completely. FBI agent Sarah Martinez stepped out of the lead vehicle with her badge gleaming in the flashing lights, her dark hair pulled back in the severe bun that Emma remembered from the hospital waiting room 3 months ago. Agent Martinez had been the one to tell Emma that her mother's death was officially ruled an accident, the one who'd sat beside her during the endless interviews, offering tissues and gentle reassurances that the bad dreams would eventually stop. "Emma, sweetheart," Agent Martinez called out, her voice carrying the same warmth that had comforted a grieving child. "Dr. Brooks, Ms. O'Sullivan, thank God you're all safe. We've been looking everywhere for you." Sam felt Emma tense against his side, her small hand gripping his jacket with white-knuckled intensity. Something was wrong. The child's instincts, honed by months of living with danger, were screaming warnings that the adults were only beginning to understand. "Where's Bobby?" Emma asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Where's my daddy?" Agent Martinez's expression flickered, just for a moment, so briefly that Sam almost missed it. But Maggie caught it too, her nurse's training and reading micro-expressions serving her well. The slight tightening around the eyes, the fractional delay before speaking, the way Martinez's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward her service weapon. "Bobby's safe, honey. He's been helping us track down the people who hurt your mama. That's how we knew to look for you here." Martinez took a step closer, her smile never wavering. "But we need to get you somewhere secure while we finish the investigation. There are still dangerous people out there." Bruno, who had been lying quietly beside Emma while a field medic treated his shoulder wound, suddenly raised his massive head. His nostrils flared as he scented the wind, and a low growl began building in his chest. Not the territorial rumble of a wild animal, but the warning sound of a guard dog who recognized a threat. "It's okay, Bruno," Emma whispered, but her voice shook with uncertainty. She looked up at Sam with eyes far too old for her 7 years. "Dr. Brooks, something feels wrong." Sam's mind raced through the timeline. How had Martinez known to look for them at his cabin? How had she assembled this much law enforcement response so quickly? And why did Emma, who had been eager to trust every adult who'd shown her kindness, seem terrified of the one person who should represent safety and justice? "Agent Martinez," Sam said carefully, "how exactly did you locate us? Emma's been missing for 3 days, and this cabin isn't on any official maps." Martinez's smile faltered slightly. "Anonymous tip. Someone called in reports of gunfire and a disturbance. When we ran the property records, your name came up, Dr. Brooks. We know you've had contact with Emma before." The lie hung in the air like smoke from a house fire, visible to anyone who knew what to look for. Sam had never met Emma before finding her in the forest, had no connection to the Patterson family, no reason to appear in any official records related to the case. Agent Martinez was fishing, or worse. She was part of whatever had killed Grace Patterson. "I've never met Emma before tonight," Sam said quietly. "So I'm wondering how my name would come up in connection with her case." The mask slipped completely. Then Martinez's hand moved to her weapon, and 2 of the officers behind her spread out to flank positions. The careful choreography of law enforcement became something else entirely, the positioning of predators preparing to strike. "Dr. Brooks, you're harboring a federal witness in an ongoing investigation. You're interfering with official business." and that animal poses a clear and present danger to civilians. Martinez's voice had gone cold, professional, stripped of the maternal warmth she'd used moments before. "Step away from the child." Emma's grip on Sam's jacket tightened. "She's one of them," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "She's one of the bad people Mama was investigating." Bruno rose to his feet, all 400 pounds of muscle and protective instinct positioning himself between Emma and the approaching officers. His hackles raised like a dark ridge along his spine, and the growl that emerged from his chest carried the promise of violence. "That bear attacks anyone. We put it down," one of the officers called out, his weapon already drawn. "No!" Emma's scream cut through the night air like a blade. "Don't hurt him! He's not dangerous unless you try to hurt me!" But Martinez was already speaking into her radio, calling for animal control and additional backup. The net was closing around them, and Sam realized with growing horror that they'd walked straight into a trap. The real FBI, if any of these people were actually federal agents, had been compromised. The system that should have protected Emma was actively hunting her. "Agent Martinez," Maggie stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 40 years dealing with life-and-death situations. "I'm a retired registered nurse, and I'm invoking my duty of care. This child shows clear signs of trauma and abuse. I'm not releasing her to anyone without proper documentation and verification of identity. Ma'am, you're interfering with federal law enforcement. I'm protecting a child." Maggie's voice could have cut glass. "And unless you can produce a valid court order signed by a federal judge, this little girl isn't going anywhere with you." The standoff stretched taut as a guitar string, with Emma caught in the middle. Bruno sensed the rising tension and moved closer to her, his massive bulk creating a living shield between the child and the people who claimed to represent justice. That's when the real cavalry arrived. The sound of motorcycles roaring up the mountain road cut through the night, not the organized approach of law enforcement, but the desperate racing of someone who knew time was running out. The lead bike took the final curve at dangerous speed, its rider's face hidden behind a helmet and tactical gear. Bobby Patterson skidded to a stop 20 feet from the assembled vehicles, his stolen police motorcycle spraying gravel as he dismounted. His left arm was in a makeshift sling. His face bore the evidence of recent violence, but his service weapon was steady as he pointed it directly at Agent Martinez. "Step away from my daughter," he commanded, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who'd spent 2 years undercover in hell and finally found his way home. "Agent Patterson?" Martinez's voice carried a note of surprise that confirmed Sam's worst fears. "You're supposed to be dead." "Sorry to disappoint you, Sarah, but it takes more than a bullet to the shoulder and 3 days in a basement to put me down." Bobby's eyes never left Martinez as he addressed the assembled officers. "Everyone here needs to know that Agent Sarah Martinez is not FBI. She's been running interference for a trafficking network that's operated for 5 years under federal cover." The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Several of the officers stepped back, confusion and alarm spreading through their ranks as they realized they'd been used as unwitting muscle for a criminal operation. Others, Sam noticed with growing dread, moved to support Martinez, indicating the corruption went deeper than anyone had imagined. "Emma, baby girl," Bobby called out, his voice breaking with emotion. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I had to leave you. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe until I could bring down the people who hurt your mama." Emma looked at him for a long moment, 7 years of abandonment trauma warring with desperate hope in her green eyes. "You came back," she whispered. "I promised your mama I'd always come back, no matter what." Martinez's face had gone pale, but her weapon remained steady. "Very touching, Patterson. But you're outnumbered, and you're interfering with official business. That child is evidence in a federal case." "Evidence?" Bobby's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "She's a 7-year-old girl whose mother died protecting her. And the only reason you want her is to make sure she never testifies about what she saw the night Grace was murdered." Emma suddenly straightened, her small voice cutting through the adult tensions with childlike clarity. "Agent Martinez was there, the night Mama died. I heard her voice on the phone talking to the bad men. She told them where to find us." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence. Martinez's careful facade crumbled completely, replaced by the cold calculation of someone with nothing left to lose. Her weapon swung toward Emma, but Bruno was faster. 400 pounds of protective fury launched itself across 20 feet of open ground with a speed that defied belief. Martinez's shot went wild as Bruno's massive paw caught her weapon, sending it spinning into the darkness. The corrupt agent hit the ground hard, Bruno's weight pinning her as he positioned his massive head inches from her throat. "Don't move," Bruno's posture seemed to say. "Don't even breathe wrong." The corrupt officers raised their weapons, but Bobby was already moving, his own gun trained on the nearest threat. "Anyone shoots that bear, they answer to me. And I've got 2 years of anger to work through." Maggie grabbed Emma and pulled her toward the cover of the trees, while Sam found himself caught in the middle of a firefight he'd never imagined in his worst nightmares. This wasn't how retirement was supposed to go, he thought absurdly, as bullets whined overhead and splintered the bark of ancient oaks. But then he saw Emma's face, no longer the terrified, abandoned child he'd found in the forest, but a little girl who'd found her family again. Bobby was here, wounded but alive. Bruno had proven his loyalty beyond any doubt. Maggie was shielding her with the fierce protectiveness of a grandmother. And Sam himself had rediscovered a purpose he'd thought died with Helen. The battle for Emma Rose Patterson's life was far from over, but for the first time since her mother's death, she wasn't fighting it alone. As sirens wailed in the distance, real help this time, Sam hoped, Bruno maintained his position over the woman who'd orchestrated so much pain. His dark eyes found Emma's across the chaos, and in that moment, the understanding between them was complete. Family protected family, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. And sometimes, family came with fur and fangs and a heart big enough to love a broken little girl back to wholeness. 6 months later, Emma Rose Patterson woke up to the smell of blueberry pancakes and the sound of Bruno's gentle snoring from the porch outside her bedroom window. The nightmares that had plagued her for so long had finally begun to fade, replaced by dreams of her mother singing Spanish lullabies, and the comforting weight of a massive paw resting protectively across her small feet. The trial had ended 3 weeks ago with Sarah Martinez sentenced to life without parole for racketeering, conspiracy, and the murder of Grace Patterson. The trafficking network she'd protected had been dismantled, with 47 arrests across 6 states and over 200 children rescued from situations that would haunt Emma's dreams if she let herself think about them too much. But today was not a day for dwelling on darkness. Today was Emma's official adoption day. "Mija, breakfast," Maggie's voice called from the kitchen, the Spanish endearment rolling off her tongue with the same natural warmth Grace had once used. In the months since that terrible night at Sam's cabin, Maggie had become Emma's unofficial grandmother, teaching her to braid hair and make tortillas and speak the kind of truth that only comes from a lifetime of hard-won wisdom. Emma padded to the kitchen in her bare feet, her pink pajamas decorated with bears, a gift from Bobby that had made her cry with happiness when she'd unwrapped it on Christmas morning. The kitchen table was set for 4, as it had been every morning since they'd all decided to make this arrangement permanent. Bobby sat reading the newspaper, his left arm still slightly stiff from the shoulder wound, but functional enough that he'd returned to modified duty with the FBI. Sam was at the stove flipping pancakes with the concentration of a man who'd discovered cooking could be another form of healing. "Buenos dias, familia," Emma announced, the Spanish words feeling as natural as breathing. She'd become fully bilingual in the months of recovery, honoring her mother's heritage while building something new with the people who'd chosen to love her. "Good morning, sunshine." Bobby looked up from his paper, and Emma still felt a small thrill of wonder that he was here, really here, not just a figment of desperate hope. The first month had been the hardest, learning to trust that he wouldn't disappear again, that his promises were real this time. But slowly, carefully, they'd rebuilt what had been broken. And now Emma couldn't imagine life without their evening talks about her mother or their weekend trips to visit Grace's grave. "Dr. Brooks is nervous," Maggie announced with barely concealed amusement. "He's made 3 batches of pancakes because he keeps burning them when he gets distracted." Sam turned from the stove, his cheeks pink with embarrassment and something that might have been joy. "I want everything to be perfect today. It's not every day a man gets to officially become a grandfather." The adoption hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock, and while the legal paperwork was just a formality at this point, the emotional weight of it had been building for weeks. Bobby would officially become Emma's legal father, but more importantly, Sam and Maggie would be legally recognized as her guardians, ensuring that she'd always have a family, even if something happened to Bobby in his dangerous line of work. "Bruno's been pacing all morning," Emma observed, looking out the window to where the massive bear was indeed walking restless circles around the yard. "I think he knows today is special." In the months since the rescue, Bruno had become something of a local celebrity. Wildlife officials had initially wanted to relocate him to a sanctuary, but Emma's testimony about his intelligence and training had changed their minds. Instead, he'd been officially designated as a therapy animal, working with traumatized children at a nearby treatment center while maintaining his home base with Emma's family. The arrangement was unprecedented, but then again, so was Bruno. "He's protective," Bobby observed, and there was deep gratitude in his voice whenever he spoke about the bear who'd saved his daughter's life. "He knows you're going somewhere without him today, and he doesn't like it." Emma had tried to explain to Bruno that the courthouse didn't allow bears, even therapy bears, but his understanding of legal proceedings was understandably limited. What he did understand was that Emma was his family, and family stayed together. The compromise they'd worked out involved Sam staying home with Bruno while Emma, Bobby, and Maggie went to the hearing, followed by a celebration picnic that would include everyone. "Will you tell me about Mama again?" Emma asked as they sat down to breakfast. It had become a morning ritual, these stories about Grace that kept her memory alive while helping Emma process her grief in healthy ways. "Your mother," Bobby began, his voice soft with remembered love, "would have been so proud of the little girl you've become. She always said you had her stubborn streak and her heart for helping others. Remember when you wanted to give all your birthday money to the animal shelter because you were worried about the homeless puppies?" Emma giggled, a sound that still made all the adults stop what they were doing just to listen. For too many months, laughter had been absent from her life. Now it bubbled up regularly, evidence of healing that went deeper than surface wounds. "Mama used to say that love isn't like a pie, where you get smaller pieces when more people come to dinner," Emma said thoughtfully. "She said love is like a candle that lights other candles. It just makes more light." Maggie reached over to squeeze Emma's hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. At 72, she'd never expected to become a mother figure, but Emma had awakened something in her that felt like coming home after a long journey. The early signs of Alzheimer's that had terrified her months ago had stabilized, and her doctor attributed the improvement to having purpose and joy in her daily life. "Your mama was a wise woman," Maggie said, "and she raised a daughter who's going to change the world." It wasn't empty praise. Emma had already begun working with the FBI's Victim Services Department, helping other traumatized children feel safe enough to share their stories. Her natural empathy and bilingual skills made her uniquely suited to comfort kids who'd experienced similar horrors, and federal prosecutors credited her advocacy with several successful convictions. At 9:30, they loaded into Bobby's truck for the drive to the courthouse. Bruno followed them to the driveway, his massive head tilted in confusion as Emma hugged him goodbye. "I'll be back soon," she promised, speaking in both English and Spanish as she'd learned he responded to. "Sam's going to give you extra treats, and tonight we'll have a party with cake." Bruno made the rumbling sound that meant contentment, but his dark eyes remained worried as the truck pulled away. Emma waved from the back window until he was out of sight, then settled between Bobby and Maggie for the 20-minute drive through the mountains. The courthouse ceremony was simple but profound. Judge Rebecca Stone, a kind woman in her 60s who'd presided over hundreds of adoption cases, took extra time to explain to Emma what was happening and why it mattered. "Emma Rose Patterson," she said formally, "do you understand that Bobby Patterson wants to be your legal father, and that Dr. Samuel Brooks and Ms. Margaret O'Sullivan want to be your legal guardians?" "Yes, ma'am," Emma replied, her voice clear and steady. "They're my family. They chose me, and I choose them. And do you understand that this means they'll take care of you and love you for the rest of your life, no matter what?" Emma looked around at the faces of the people who'd saved her in every way that mattered. Bobby, who'd sacrificed everything to protect her, Maggie, who'd given her the mother's love she'd thought was lost forever, and Sam, who'd rediscovered his purpose through caring for her. Even Bruno, waiting at home with patient devotion, was part of this chosen family that had grown from tragedy and trauma. "Yes, ma'am," she said again. "Just like Bruno chose me in the forest, sometimes the best families are the ones that find each other when everything else is broken." Judge Stone smiled as she signed the final papers. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of Tennessee, I declare this adoption final and binding. Emma Rose Patterson, you are officially and forever part of the Brooks O'Sullivan Patterson family." The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening, with neighbors and friends gathering at the cabin for a potluck dinner that would have made Grace proud. Emma sat between Bobby and Sam, with Maggie across the table and Bruno lying at her feet like a furry guardian angel, and felt the kind of complete happiness she'd thought was impossible after her mother's death. As the sun set behind the mountains and the fireflies began their evening dance, Emma made a wish that her mother could see her now, surrounded by love, protected by fierce loyalty, and growing into the kind of person who would honor Grace's memory by helping others find their way home. "Sometimes," she thought sleepily as Bruno's gentle breathing lulled her toward dreams, "the most beautiful families are born from the deepest sorrows, and the strongest love grows in the places where hearts have been broken and carefully mended back together." In a world that often tells us our best years are behind us, Emma's story reminds us that family isn't confined by age, blood, or even species. It's defined by who shows up when everything falls apart. Dr. Sam Brooks thought his life ended at 68 when Helen died, leaving him counting Social Security checks in an empty cabin. But sometimes our greatest purpose arrives disguised as someone else's desperate need. When Sam found Emma and Bruno in those Tennessee woods, he didn't just save them, they saved him right back, proving that love multiplies when we open our hearts to unexpected connections. Margaret's arthritis didn't stop her from becoming the grandmother she'd always dreamed of being. Bobby's mistakes didn't disqualify him from redemption. And Bruno's broken past didn't prevent him from becoming a guardian angel with fur. For those of us in our golden years, wondering if we still matter, if there's still time to make a difference, Emma's chosen family shows us that our wisdom, experience, and capacity for love are exactly what this hurting world needs most. Sometimes, the most beautiful chapters of our lives begin when we think the story is nearly over. What moment in your life made you realize family extends beyond blood? Have you ever experienced an unexpected connection that changed everything? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how love found you when you least expected it.